Are psychopaths heroes? Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy. My name is Crispin. Today I want to talk about the changing social view of psychopaths and narcissists. This is just a really interesting phenomenon, and I would like to explore it with you. So anyone who knows me knows that I think of the present cultural age as being a total exercise in collective malaise, right? So many remakes of things that were once great, whether it's the Star Wars or Ghostbusters or any comic, everything that is just emerged in the 1980s is redone in the 2020s or 2010s, and it's just a complete nightmarish pale echo of what was a once great franchise. And that is true almost across the board. There's very few truly innovative ideas, and I think the structure of the landscape has been a contributing factor to that. Even pre-COVID, it was more like, okay, well, what's reliable? What has a fan base? What can we depend on in terms of getting ticket sales for film and whatnot? So that's a different topic. But one exception to this, which I think is unusual, is the concept of the psychopath being the anti-hero. Now, until recent times, I think there was literally one trope of this kind in popular fiction, and that was Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, the Victorian detective who, personality-wise, I think has all of the tropes of being a psychopath, someone who just doesn't have empathy for other humans and looks at everything very clinically. And he's sort of observed as a bizarre social oddity through the narration of his offsider, Dr. Watson. But he's also seen as not a bad person. He's found a niche in the society that contributes to the good, solving crime. But beyond that, the villain of the narcissist and the psychopath, and the distinction between them, has become extremely prevalent. Did during the subsequent years. And I think the epicenter of that was in the first Dirty Harry movie, where I think it was Andrew Sullivan, his name, played the villain, who was the first film villain, really, who didn't have a motive beyond chaos, right? Someone who was persuasive, the Batman's Joker, right? Reasons for having a particular worldview, but not some kind of Machiavellian objective. I want to become rich, I want to become powerful. It was, no, I think this way. And that created a new mystique of the villain character, the raging psychopath. And then you had the collective psychopath, which would be Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, like probably the most archetypal genius villain of all time, but one who didn't have a motivation beyond their own psychopathology. But now I've seen many characters emerge in popular fiction who are good and psychopathic, or at least not bad. Okay. And the top of that list, or narcissistic, and this example will be a narcissistic one. The top of that list is Tony Stark from Iron Man. They make his narcissistic personality disorder explicit in one of the Iron Man. He picks up his psychological profile. There's the other characters that are standing over him, and he's like, narcissistic personality disorder, and they just look at him, and he's like, true. He's someone who's absolutely egotistical, massively self-absorbed, but also at his core a good person and a true hero willing to sacrifice himself, not for glory, but for the actual good reasons of doing so. And so you have this character. Now, and then on the psychopathic side, you have this character from The Expanse, whose name escapes me, and I'll look it up. But he's one of the four main characters, and truly, he's a psychopath. Like he knows that he doesn't have empathy for other people. And the way he manages this is he finds someone who he perceives to be a highly empathetic person and a strong conscience, and goes, okay, well, what do they do? All right, well, I'll let them have a degree of power over me, i.e. I'll build a relationship with that individual, and what they tell me is the right thing to do, I will do it, basically, absent any other direction. But he's also a really great observer of human behavior as a consequence of his psychology, and comes up with all these really interesting points about things in his conversations that that the other characters could not have made. But he is himself a very violent individual. He's a soldier. He's the muscle in the group, right? But he subordinates that to something that is basically a projection of moral code. And in the show, he's a great character. He's one of my favorite characters, and I'm not very good with names. And then there is another villain who's almost identical to this character, who is in the Daredevil show, the Bullseye character, I think. His narrative is just extraordinary. Like if you watch any show, watch Netflix's Daredevil, because the final season he's this great character who has all of the same structures. He had a long-running psychologist that helped him. So he's a character who is a complete psychopath, and also has this super ability. Right, he never misses a target. He can throw any object and basically kill anybody instantly. Right, it's a superpower. So psychopath, deadly force. Yet he had series of structures built up around him to manage that. A rigid hierarchy in the FBI, another figure, a conscience figure who he would attach to be like, okay, well, what's the right thing and wrong thing to do here? Someone of high empathy. And he had all these pillars put in place to manage his predilections. And what happens in the show is that Kingpin, greatest villain ever, comes along and sees all this and systematically kicks out those pillars and adopts. He becomes the father figure and then manipulates this character to do terrible, evil deeds. So he becomes a villain, but he becomes a villain because those support structures are kicked out from underneath him, not because he's an inherently bad person. And that's the change of psychology, I think, is really interesting. And I think even in this sense, they're a bit further than the profession of psychology in popular culture, that they say, well, actually, it doesn't really matter if you have a conscience or empathy or any of those things if you have a desire to do good, right? If you're willing to be like, okay, well, you may not have the capacities to make this natural for you, but if you put the right structures in place, you can actually do good things without having necessarily good motivations. And in doing so, you find a family, you find a place in society. You are not a destructive individual, either for yourself or others. And so this recasting of the psychopath and the narcissist is potentially a hero. I think it's an extraordinarily interesting idea in literary and popular tradition. And I think it, by and large, is probably good for people, because what it does is, for those people that do have that predilection, they have role models. They have examples that are positive. Like previously, it's all like, oh, okay, well, clearly the society thinks that you're going to be a massive villain, serial killer, or whatever. Well, maybe I'll go in that direction. Now it's like, oh, no, there is actually a place where you can be part of the hero team. You don't have to sympathize with the villain all the time. You can actually see how they became the villain in a lot of cases and be like, oh, that's really tragic. If only they had these good characters. And my favorite case of this, and this was in the transitional period, this is before we got to this point, this was in the 90s. And I'll do a whole video on this because it's this one character, which is in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which has got a big renaissance because it was a serialized show in the 90s, but has been getting a renewed favor because of the format of streaming services. Star Trek's Deep Space Nine main villain, Gul Dukat. Gul Dukat, I think, is the greatest villain ever written. And that is because he is a pathological malignant narcissist, right? but you can see he has this potential to turn good the whole way through the series. And in large part, the heroes of the show have a role and responsibility to play in why he hasn't been, redeeming himself in that way. Like, it's clear that he is attached to these main characters and values their opinion. And you kind of can't help but think, look, if, Captain Sisko or Kira Nerys or Odo had a different attitude, more welcoming, then they could have teased out the better angels of his nature. But the fact that they perennially find him irritating and reject him for good reasons, I mean, he is a pathological narcissist, shows that he keeps getting pushed back in that direction. So I'll do a whole thing on Gul Dukat, because for those many, like, it's an ongoing debate. Is Gul Dukat a good guy or a bad guy? And the fact that debate has been running for 20 years is an indication of how interesting that character is. But I'll do a show on that specifically. But for now, I'm just throwing out there that whatever your views on the psychopaths and the narcissists of the world, the fact that they have positive role models in popular culture that don't say you have to change who you are, you can find a place and people will value you and care about you, and you can do good things and be part of the majority, let's say, without losing your distinctiveness, is a progressive step forward, I think, in our popular narrative, and more real as well. So it's also not only is it positive, it's also true. Also more highlighted by the fact that so much else in our culture is regressing. So thank you very much.